Hey guys, how's it going? Laura with Garden Answer. Today I want to give you 4 really easy steps on how you can plan your vegetable garden. Step number 1 is to pick the perfect spot. Now there are a couple of things that you want to look for. The first thing is to find a spot that has at least 6 to 8 hours of sun. The more sun, the better. Most vegetables are full sun lovers, so the more sun they get, the healthier they're going to be, which means they'll be more resistant to insects and diseases. Now if you can't find a spot that has full sun, don't worry too much about it. You can still grow leafy vegetables like spinach and lettuce. They're far more shade tolerant. And second, you'll want to make sure that your spot is close to a good water source because it'll just make it a whole lot easier on you. Most vegetables are not drought tolerant and they need consistent moisture. You might also consider choosing a spot that's really close to your house because it makes it much easier on you when you're ready to harvest these vegetables. You're really close to the kitchen, makes it a lot easier to cook with them. And keep in mind that you do not need to have a huge space to have a successful garden. You can have a great vegetable garden in pots, on your patio or your balcony, and sometimes a smaller garden that's well tended will produce more than a huge garden that isn't as well tended. Step number 2 is to test your soil, and this can be a pretty involved subject, so I'm going to do my very best to simplify it. Basically, our gardens are as good as our soil. If we have bad soil, our vegetables will suffer. So the first test you can run is a pH test, which you can pick up at your local garden center. And what we want to do is shoot for a pH somewhere near neutral. Extremes on either end is not really an ideal situation. So if you have really high acid soil, you're going to want to add some garden lime into your soil to help bring that pH up closer to neutral. And if you have very alkaline soil, you're going to want to add some soil acidifier to help lower the pH. You'll also want to note the consistency of your soil. So for example, if you have really sandy soil, you're going to want to start adding some organic matter to it, some compost to help it not be quite so sandy and so the water doesn't run away super quickly. If you have really heavy clay soil where it just holds on to water for a long time and stays boggy, you're going to start wanting to add some things into it like gypsum to help condition it. Another really smart thing to do is to add a good starter fertilizer to your soil like Espoma Biotone. It adds a lot of good microbes and mycorrhizae to your soil, and I also like the fact that it's organic because that means it's slower to break down and slower to feed your plants, so your plants have something to feed on longer. But honestly, at the end of the day, I really recommend gardening in raised beds because then you can control exactly what kind of soil you're gardening in because you get to fill your beds with what you want. And a lot of garden centers sell pre-mixed like raised bed soil mixes, and that's actually what I did. Step number 3 is to decide what you want to plant, and this is the very best and fun part to me. I'd encourage you guys to stick with the basics, start small, especially if you're a beginner gardener, and grow things that your family will actually eat. I know it's easy to get carried away. I've been there. We're at the garden center looking at all the seeds and the vegetable starts, and we want to plant all the things, but in reality, most of us don't have time to take care of a garden like that. So I'd stick with the staples and maybe add in 1 or 2 different and new things every year. Keep in mind that some type of crops like tomatoes and peppers will produce for a really long time throughout the season, and then other types of crops like corn and carrots will only produce once. So that might make a difference as to how much space you plan for each type of crop. Step number 4 is to plan your layout, and there's 2 basic approaches to this. There's planting in rows and there's planting more intensively like square foot gardening. So the benefits of planting in rows is that it's a lot easier to maintain as far as weeds go because there's a lot more space to get hand tools and sometimes small equipment like small tillers in there to help maintain those weeds and take care of them. The downside is that it takes up a pretty good sized area because of all the space in between each row. So if space is in short supply for you, gardening intensively or square foot gardening might be a better option. Intensive gardening is where you plant your crops a lot thicker, usually in a band from about 1 to 4 feet wide, and the row can be as long as you want it to be. Square foot gardening is much the same concept, except you break your space up into 1 foot squares, oftentimes alternating what crops are in each one of the squares. And this is a really great way to garden in raised beds because you can really get a lot of produce out of a small amount of space, and that's one huge benefit of it. And the other benefit of it is that it takes up far less space than row cropping. The con is that the crops are so tightly planted that you do have to hand weed. And one last tip, if you're gardening in raised beds or intensive gardening, you want to make sure that the width of the area is a comfortable distance for you. I've found that 3 foot wide beds are the most comfortable for me rather than 4 foot, which is kind of a standard, because at 3 feet I can much easier reach to the center to weed or do any maintenance. 4 feet is just a little bit uncomfortable for me. So just make sure that you're comfortable with whatever width it is. So those are my 4 tips, and I do plan on making 2 more videos. One will be a general guide on planting, and the other will be on harvesting. So make sure you're subscribed and that you have notifications on. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and we will see you in the next one. Bye.